Thank you all for coming. First, let me say how happy I am with the election result. I'm sure you are, too. And it's especially gratifying to me because I've been banging my head against the stone wall of Republican obtuseness for 20 or 30 years until Donald Trump came along. But it wasn't just Trump. But I can't think of another leader who could have done what he has done. I believe he's going to change the political landscape of this country. But as I was talking to Mike earlier, I have a list here of the people in the Trump administration that he's just appointed who are either very close friends of the center, like Senator Jeff Sessions, or are friends of the center in the sense that they have been at our events, spoken at our weekend. It's quite an impressive list. Mike Pence, Rick Perry, Ryan Zinke, Ben Carson, Jeff Sessions, Andy Puzder, and people not in the cabinet who have key positions who are fans of the center. Reince Priebus, Steve Bannon, and my personal favorite is Steve Miller, because Steve, who was today appointed the senior policy advisor in the White House, and who has written Trump's speeches and actually opened for him at his rallies and was his policy chief during the campaign, is a kind of protege of mine. We've worked with him since he was at Santa Monica High School. Not that long ago, because he's only 30, but it was maybe 13 years ago. And when he went to college, he arranged, I had a big event at Duke University that he put together. Very bright young man. Gives me a lot of hope. Kellyanne Conway is another who used to be come to our weekends. And Steve Moore, the economic advisor, is also a very familiar face. So the center has a big stake in this administration. And can appreciate that what a bullet this country dodged. We were on the brink. I mean, it's never over until one side gives up. You have to appreciate the left. Most of the people actually leading the Democratic Party these days, but most of the people leading the left, Bernie Sanders is a good example, spent their lives supporting a system, a communist system, that collapsed, that killed 100 million people, that spread poverty across whole continents, had all of their dreams blown apart, and yet never stopped political organizing and political activity until they elected Barack Obama, who's one of them. The Democratic Party today is an extreme left-wing party. Really, the politics of the Democratic Party are, except for the absence of the Soviet Union, are no different from the politics of my parents, who were card-carrying communists. Barack Obama comes from the same background that I did. He was brought up by communists. So he actually spent his life in the communist movement and never left it. And surrounded, I mean, his political campaign manager, Axelrod, also comes from a family of communists, never left the communist left. Valerie Jarrett, the power behind the throne, comes from a family of Iranian communists, never left the left. You look at the Democratic Party leadership of the Hillary, the only decent thing about Hillary's politics ever was her husband, Bill Clinton, who, for whatever his many other serious faults, Clinton's ideology was kind of meism. He wasn't really an ideological leftist. I think that's why she supported the Iraq War, for example. Tim Kaine was a Christic Institute Marxist who during the 80s was in Central America supporting the communist guerrillas. Bernie Sanders, who represents a very obviously powerful wing of the Democratic Party, he would have got the nomination if they if the cartel hadn't fixed it. Bernie is more of an honest communist. He spent his life supporting communist causes. The only really big lie he's told is that Denmark is his model when it's Cuba and Venezuela. How did the Democratic Party get this way? It's been a 50-year development. It started in 1968 when the late Tom Hayden, may he be restless, really bad person, whom I knew well in the 60s, organized a riot at the Democratic Party convention in 1968. And the purpose of the riot was to destroy the electoral chances of Hubert Humphrey, who was the Democratic Party nominee, because Hubert Humphrey supported the Vietnam War. The New Left, the left, is an anti-American movement from the very beginning. And they successfully destroyed the Humphrey candidacy and elected Nixon. And then they all marched off the streets into the Democratic Party. And they created these caucuses, the Black Caucus and Women's Caucus and so forth, which eventually took control of the party apparatus behind the campaign of George McGovern. George McGovern was a Henry Wallace. That's how he started his political career, another leftist. The Clinton administration was a little bit of a fluke, as I say, because Bill Clinton was a meist. That was his ideology. And so he was a pragmatic. He's a very smart guy. Morally very corrupt, obviously, but a very smart guy. And domestically, he was also blessed by the fact that the Republicans got control of the Congress at some point and sort of kept his spending somewhat in check. But we forget, and one of the reasons I've written this series of books, I didn't realize until I began assembling a kind of bibliography of my writings that everything I wrote was about the left. And then I organized it into this series, and it's been quite an enterprise. It's expensive to produce the series, but I thought there should be a record, because we forget very quickly what happened. And so this series is really a record of the 30 years that the left took over the Democratic Party and what they did. Like, how many people remember that Bill Clinton, during Bill Clinton's administration, he brought, he had Chinese communist operatives in the White House. He and Gore collected money from the Chinese communists in the White House for the Democratic Party. 2 illegal things, one of them treasonous. There was a committee that was headed by Fred Thompson to investigate this, but it was torpedoed by the ranking member, John Gled, who traded his country's safety for a ride in space. He became the oldest man to get a ride in space. You probably saw the ride in space bit and all these encomiums for him. But it was a very serious betrayal, in my view, of this country that he torpedoed that committee. Probably forget, how many people remember that, and I, of course, wrote about this in the book, that during the Clinton administration, the Chinese communists were able to steal the designs for our entire nuclear arsenal. Or that Clinton's energy secretary, Hazel O'Leary, published 11 million pages of all the records of all of our nuclear tests to deliver to the world, including all our enemies. And in doing so said that this was an act against the bomb culture. If you look at Clinton's domestic policies, they weren't that bad, actually. And that's partly because of the Gingrich Congress, and partly because Clinton was a pragmatist. But if you look at foreign policy, it was terrible. And the way you can measure the progress of the Democratic Party towards the anti-American left until it has become a party of the anti-American left. You look at the War on Terror. In 1993, the World Trade Center was attacked the first time. The bombs that Ramzi Youssef set were designed to topple one tower onto the other and kill 50,000 people. But it misfired, and only 6 people were killed, but 1,000 were injured. Bill Clinton never visited the site. The Democratic Party, from that moment, treated it as though it was a criminal act by individuals, and were in denial that it was that war had been declared on us, basically, by the Islamic. You can call them Islamic radicals. I guess that's a fair title. But Islam itself, as I think you all know, is, shall we say, problematic. There was a series of attacks on America, the USS Cole, Khobar Towers, during the 90s that weren't answered. Because the Democrats did not want to recognize that we had these enemies. And then in the Bush administration, now there's another volume of this series called The Great Betrayal, which is about the Iraq War. I want to say a few words about the Iraq War because the Bush people did not fight the battle politically. This was the turning point where the Democratic Party became what I would call a communist party, sympathetic to our enemies. It was Bill Clinton who signed what was called the Iraqi Liberation Act in 1998. And that act said that Saddam Hussein had to be removed by any means necessary. But being that Bill Clinton was the head of a party which hated the American military and didn't want to defend this country, he couldn't send troops into Iraq. So what he did was he fired 450 cruise missiles into Iraq, which is a sovereign country. So when Bush came into power, there was this Iraqi Liberation Act. We were at war with Saddam Hussein. If you'll recall, Saddam Hussein had swallowed Kuwait in the beginning of the 90s, and there was a truce in that war, and Saddam Hussein systematically violated the truce. And the United States and Britain had to fly over northern Iraq to prevent Saddam Hussein from poison gassing the Kurds as he had already done. So there was a low-level war with Saddam all that time. So what Bush did when he came into office was to issue an ultimatum to Saddam. He did it in June 2002. Saddam had expelled the UN inspectors. That was part of the truce agreement, was that there would be inspectors to see that he didn't rebuild his nuclear capacity. He threw them out of the country. And in June, Bush said, you got to let the UN inspectors in, and we are going to, well, what Bush did was he put 100,000 troops on the Iraqi border, which eventually became 200,000. That's when Saddam allowed the UN inspectors in, but then played a cat and mouse game. Bush got both houses of Congress to authorize the use of force. It's the authorization of the use of force is what Obama uses as an excuse to go into Libya, which was not a threat to this country, and invade Libya. He went to the UN. He got a Security Council 15-0 authorizing the use of, well, giving Saddam an ultimatum that he had to destroy his weapons of mass destruction and prove that he had destroyed them by December 7th, 2002. And so when we went to war, now there were 100 Democrats in the House that voted against it, but the majority of Democrat senators voted for the authorization. The United States invaded Iraq in March, and by April, the regime had been toppled. Within, I forget what it was, a few weeks, the regime was toppled. Saddam was captured. And then in June, the Democrats who had voted to authorize the war, turned against it. Now, why did the Democrats turn against the war? They turned against the war because an anti-American leftist named Howard Dean, who eventually became the chair of the Democratic Party, was winning the Democratic primary. There was a presidential primary in the spring of 2003, and he was running away with the nomination. I forget the exact figures, but he had something like 45% of the vote, and John Kerry and John Edwards had like 10%. And in June of that year, they flipped and turned against the war, and the Democratic Party did. And they did it behind a huge lie, which was that Bush had lied about the weapons of mass destruction to snooker them into the war. Bush couldn't have lied to the Democrats. Why? Because we're a democracy, and the Democrats sit on the intelligence committees. Actually, George Tenet, who was the head of the CIA, was a Clinton appointment. So they lied about the lie. Why did they do that? Because they couldn't admit that they had turned against a war with young Americans whom they had sent into harm's way. They turned against, they basically stabbed them in the back. And they did it because they saw a political advantage. Well, because of Howard Dean was winning the nomination. The left had become that powerful. When I first became a conservative, one of the things I noticed was there was no kind of ground force on the conservative side. On the Democrat side, there were all these leftists, like the Occupy Wall Street people, the Black Lives Matter people, and so forth. There was nothing like that on the right. The right, as far as the right was concerned, politics takes place every 4 years or every 2 years. And in between, you just, run the country or don't run it and run your businesses. But for the left is at war all the time. All the time. Every leftist gets up every day and tries to figure out how to destroy this country. Every one of them. And none of them give any thought to how to make a society work. And the terrible thing that happened was that the Bush administration decided not to confront the Democrats politically. The Democrats, over the next 5 years, committed what can only be called treason. I mean, people are, amazed at the bias in the press for this election. How about the fact that every day of the Iraq war, every single day, the New York Times ran on its front page the body bags, the body count, how many Americans were killed. For 8 years, Obama killed more people in Afghanistan, mainly because of his rules of engagement, which tied the hands of our soldiers, got our soldiers killed. No stories about the body bags. But the Bush administration stayed silent, did not say to the Democrats, you're getting our young men and women killed. John Kerry, in the 2004 election, he became, by turning against the war, he became the nominee of the party, which tells you where the party was. There were 1 million people in the streets protesting the lead up to the Iraq War. There is no peace movement in America. There's never been a peace movement in America. It's an anti-American movement. That was the left, and they pushed the Democratic Party, what was left of any resistance to them, off the map during that time. But the Bush administration did not defend itself. And the result is that conservatives turned against the war. And the one huge issue where I disagree with Donald Trump is Donald Trump says the Iraq War was a mistake. No, it wasn't. It was an absolute necessity. Can you imagine what's going on in the Middle East with a Saddam Hussein armed with nuclear and chemical and biological weapons, which, by the way, he had. Not the nuclear ones, but the biological and chemical. I mean, if you remember, there were news reports a couple of years ago about ISIS stumbling upon a chemical weapons storage plant. Well, who put the chemical weapons? Where did Assad get the chemical weapons? Got them from Saddam Hussein. And they also stumbled upon sarin gas-filled rockets, 2,500 of them, or 2,200 of them. I remember watching a Megyn Kelly segment in which she, first she did the story about they discovered the 2,200 rockets and said, but they've degraded. But those were Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction. Then she went on, she had Cheney on, she said, you were wrong about the Iraq War. No, he wasn't, he was right. You know, people, I once had a Marxist mentor, Isaac Deutscher, who said to me, David, the problem in politics is people have a hard time putting 2 and 2 together and getting 4. And that's true on the right as well as on the left. So Trump never should have said Bush lied, because Bush couldn't have lied about and didn't lie about the weapons of mass destruction. But I think that Trump's attack on the Iraq War was politically a smart move. You can't litigate the war 10 years later or whatever in a presidential campaign. So he just got that off his back. Republicans, when he said that, the Republican candidate is usually attacked by the Democrats as a warmonger. Couldn't do that with Trump, so I let it go. But the fact of the matter is, that's when the Democratic Party became an anti-American party. Now, why is this the case? What is this mentality? It's very hard for people who are not ideologues or have never been, let's say, part of an ideological movement to understand how the left thinks. How can the left hate America? I mean, you know, if you have any sense of how people are and how societies work, and you look at the society of the world, America is like paradise. There is no more tolerant country in the world. Because you can be tolerant if you're, you know, got one race, or, you know, minorities are very small. But there's no society which has large minorities the way we do that's as tolerant as America, where there's as much opportunity, that's as decent as America, that's as generous as America. So how can leftists hate us? Well, it's very easy if you have a vision of a future that's impossible. It used to be called communism, then socialism. Now it's called social justice, where you have a world in which everybody's equal, in which there's no prejudice and so forth, and everybody's taken care of, and everybody has a house and so forth and so on. And you just are blind to the willful pigheadedness and evil that's inside human beings. I mean, it's there. So that's how they hate America. But there's something else that's been going on for the last 30 years in the left. It's no longer the working class. As you know, it's genders and races. Let me pick out these politically correct terms. And the greatest thing that Donald Trump has done that nobody can take away from him, no matter what happens, is to have blown up the what's called political correctness bubble. Political correctness is very sinister. It's not funny. I mean, we tend to laugh at it, but it's not funny because what it does is it shuts down dissent. It shuts down thinking. It's actually a term, political correctness, that was coined by Mao Zedong, one of the greatest, perhaps the greatest mass murderer in human history. And I mean, I remember growing up in a communist community, the party line was very important. You didn't deviate from the party. The party would have a line on something, would have an attitude towards something. And if you deviated from it, you were threatened with expulsion from the party, which means you lose all your friends. You just get cast out into the cold. So I think of political correctness as the party line. And it's very sinister the way they do things. Subtle, but very effective. Undocumented immigrant. Like they lost their documents. But what is that? That just says that America can have no borders, that our laws don't mean anything. And we're the only country in the world that doesn't have, I mean, of any significance, that doesn't have borders. That's what it means, undocumented instead of illegal. The mind games that leftists play on themselves, and I can't remember what show I was watching this on, but it was a college student saying, can't be an illegal immigrant. Human beings can't be illegal. No, but they can commit illegal acts. I mean, it didn't make any sense. But the term I want to focus on is people of color. Now, people of color, and of course, you know, when you use the term undocumented immigrant, you are erasing America's laws. That's basically what it's about. People of color, that's not English. It's not grammatical English. You don't say, I've got a box of crayons of color. It's French, actually. That's the way French people talk. Which, I have nothing against it, but then you have to ask yourself, why do they invent a term that's not English? Why is that so important? Well, think about Mexico. Here's a country that has two main ethnicities. The descendants of the Spanish conquistadors who slaughtered the Aztecs, and the descendants of the Aztecs, the indigenous Indians. But when those two groups cross the border, they're people of color. They're oppressed. We have to make special allowances for them because they've been oppressed, and give them the oppressors and the oppressed. We have to treat them all as oppressed. And give them certain privileges and benefits and so forth. Maharajas in India are people of color. The beheaders in Raqqa are people of color. The slavers in the Sudan are people of color. Every Islamist that wants to murder us because we're infidels is a person of color. That's a huge reason why Democrats, so-called leftists, identify with the people who want to kill us. They're sympathetic. How can they be sympathetic to the Islamic world these misogynists, these gay haters, these Jew haters, these Christian haters. When you think of I hate the word liberal because these people are bigots, but when you think of liberals, I mean, they don't like religious people, that is Christians or Jews, because religious people have moral principles that they find offensive. However, here's 1.5 billion people who think it's okay to kill you if you leave the religion, or hang you from cranes if you're gay, or beat you like a drum if you're female. And liberals are fine with that because these are people of color and we're going to make allowances for them. That's how they defend criminals in our streets. Yeah, I've noticed the left is almost defined by supporting our enemies abroad, because they're mainly people of color, aren't they? Everybody is a person of color except white people. White people bad, white people evil, white people oppressors. And where does this all come from? Well, I forgot, I actually had printed this little quote out from the Communist Manifesto and forgot it. But it doesn't matter, I know what it says. Now you think the Communist Manifesto, that's an old David. I mean, actually I was once called a relic by a sympathizer with the Islamists at Harvard. Noah, I forget his last name, some law professor in the New York Times. So you think the Communist Manifesto is a relic, you haven't been to college lately. Every college student in America has been forced to read the Communist Manifesto, sometimes as many as 4 times if they have the right courses before they graduate. And it'll be taught by somebody who thinks this evil, stupid document is genius. Well, if you remember how it opens, it says, the history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggles. Actually, no, it isn't, but that's what it says. And then it lists these struggles. It's the aristocracy versus the serfs. It's the slave owners versus the slaves. And now it's the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat. Or if we speak in today's speak, corporations, the 1% versus the 99%. So if you were on the left, if you've been to school, if you've been to, especially, I have to say, the elite private schools, well, their instructors are all like this, Marxists. You see the world as divided into oppressors and oppressed, victimizers and victims. That's the way you see it. And of course, white people are the oppressors because everybody else is a person of color. And of course, it works also in the gender area as well. So the big difference and what has seized hold of the Democratic Party, so, you know, I didn't mention, but, you know, the candidate to be DNC chief is a rabid, racist, anti-Semite, pro-Muslim Brotherhood agent named Keith Ellison, supported by Schumer. I tell you what the Democratic Party is about. And if you think this is new, in the Clinton administration, the political director of the Democratic National Committee was Carlotta Scott, who was a mistress of the Marxist dictator of Grenada and committed, you know, I don't tell you the whole story, but in my book, committed treason during the Clinton administration with the Marxist dictator of Grenada. So the Democratic Party, this has been going on for a long time. And that's one of the reasons that we have produced this series, this black book, so that people understand that this has been developing over a very long time, and it's not going to change with one candidate or one individual. And it's so clear that Republicans don't understand this. Otherwise, you would never have the never-Trumpers. You would not want to elect Hillary Clinton and bring back to the White House Huma Abedin, who is a Muslim Brotherhood operative, or Ben Rhodes, or any of these people who created the deal with Iran. I mean, just you know, when I said we dodged a bullet, just think of what it is. Here we had this Iran deal. We're giving Iran nuclear weapons. We're giving them 150, actually it's almost $200 billion. And their leaders are chanting death to America while the negotiations are going on. And there are no controls on them. And Obama is so protected because he's black and because people are so politically correct, so intimidated. That's what it is. It's intimidation. So, I mean, what other Republican that you can think of would have said to Hillary Clinton's face, "You're a liar and a crook"? Or to put it another way, maybe one Republican who, had he been president-elect and his chief strategist and his attorney general nominee had been called white nationalists and racist, would not have thrown them under the bus. There is none. None. So Donald Trump has liberated this country. I mean, the battles are going to go on. Believe me, there's going to be wars in this country. Well, we can be very grateful that we passed through this point and won that election. I mean, one of the wars that we're going to be involved in, but one of the wars that's already there is the sanctuary cities. Now, I happen to think, first of all, he shouldn't just defund the sanctuary cities. He needs to prosecute de Blasio, Rahm Emanuel, and every member of every city council that has signed those resolutions of non-cooperation with the Department of Homeland Security. I think this is a good war for us. The problem, in my view, over the last 30 years is that Republicans have not been prepared to fight. Fight at all. Fight a war, fight. And Trump he's shown that he's been willing. I mean, I hope it doesn't change when he becomes president, but he's shown that he's not afraid of a battle. This is the big thing. So what the left is really about, and you know, again, to go back to the original statement about how left the Democratic Party is, it's embraced Black Lives Matter. This is a Ku Klux Klan Black Lives Matter. This is a racist movement. Its icon is Assata Shakur, who murdered a police officer who was on the ground. I mean, there's no reason she had to kill him. She just executed him. And is, you know, a refugee in Cuba, an exile in Cuba. But Black Lives Matter is a racist movement, and it's at war with police, but then the left has been at war with the police. That's what the Black Panthers were about. It's just much, much, much worse now. And this is officially embraced by the Democratic Party and supported by Democrats across the board. I mean, if you know a Democrat who's denounced Black Lives Matter, let me know. But and it's the New York Times and the Atlantic Monthly. Ta-Nehisi Coates, who is America's most pampered racist. I've written about him. They're all Black Lives Matter people. What the left has done is to structure a hierarchy. See, it's left always see things in terms of hierarchies. They just want to make what they consider to be the last first and the first last. So they want a racial gender hierarchy. If you're black, you're untouchable. Black people don't commit crimes. They're forced to do so by actually Ta-Nehisi Coates has written this. And I'm talking about a guy who wrote a book that won the National Book Award. I forgot the name of it, but it does. I'm just getting old. The name of his book, but it's in the form of a letter to his son. And one of the big things in the book is his friend was killed by a police officer. The police officer said he was trying to run him over with his vehicle. His friend, of course, was black. Ta-Nehisi Coates is black, and he's the son of a Black Panther. Problem is that the police officer is also black. So how does Ta-Nehisi Coates deal with this? He says he was thinking white. This man is a rank racist, and he's a celebrated author, National Book Award, Atlantic Monthly columnist. You'll see him all over. He's got a new book out, which just sounds completely horrendous. So what the left wants is this hierarchy where blacks are at the top, female blacks even higher, queer blacks even higher. But that's not the point. The point is whites are at the bottom. That's the point. There is a race war in this country against white people. Just the way the Islamists have this war against infidels. I mean, actually, that's a kind of a healthier attitude. You don't like people because they don't believe in your God. It's kind of better than you hate people just because their skin color is white. But it's hugely politically incorrect to say what I'm saying. But I think more and more people will be saying it. And if you want to, my favorite person saying this is Milo Yiannopoulos. And it's been a great weight lifted from my shoulders in the last couple of years, because I used to feel very lonely going out on college campuses, and now we have these young people. They're much better at it, actually, than I was. And they're very aggressive, and they're very in your face. And that's one of the things, I mean, people are saying this now a lot, that the press obviously has destroyed its own credibility. Otherwise, Trump could never have been elected. And the left is destroying its credibility as we speak. And that's why I'd like to be fully optimistic, but I've been optimistic in the past, and it hasn't kind of worked out. So I'm going to be a little cautious, but I can't see anything in the future but the left's credibility eroding and the conservative cause gaining. So I hope that illuminated a little bit about what's happened to the Democratic Party, and I will now take your questions.
Borders as Obama is, and afraid to make change that would erode the power base. For example, if Trump tries to push the moving the embassy to Jerusalem and Israel, I think the Republicans will be crying just as much as the Democrats. What is your take on
I learned as a somewhat younger man not to expect revolutions to succeed. Trump is, first of all, he's given to hyperbole, and he's taken on a lot more, drain the swamp. Well, I don't think that's going to happen. However, Trump is going to build a wall. Whatever Paul Ryan says, Trump is going to build a wall. And he'll have tremendous support for that. And he will secure the borders a hell of a lot more than they are now. And he will deport criminals, I believe that. And I think he will take on sanctuary cities. I can't get inside Paul Ryan's head, or our typical Republican's head. I never could. But I think they have to be impressed by the fact that Trump didn't sort of self-destruct. Let's remember what they were saying when Trump started. He's going to be slaughtered. He won't get any votes. He's going to take down the down-ticket party. Didn't happen. So it's one of the, it's like the emperor has no clothes. The little boy pointed it out. Well, Trump is that little boy. And he's exploded, as I say, the political correctness bubble. So I don't think that they're going to be as ferocious. I think that'll be their instinct, what you said. That's going to be their instinct. And it will be a battle all the way. And, one of the roles that we at the center see ourselves as having is to keep pushing the way we've been pushing. And it's definitely had an impact. Now, I've written another book. God help me. One of the chapters is called The Achilles Heel of the Democratic Party, which is their control of the inner cities. If you would attack that, as Republicans haven't, you expose their hypocrisy and you drive a wedge through their political base. The Democrats cannot win national elections unless they have 90% of the black vote. As I say, I had this relationship with a little bit of a mentor with Steve Miller, who's now the senior policy advisor in the White House. And I was like, I guess, a broken record or whatever, the obnoxious person at a party who's driving a point. But it was always about the inner cities and the importance of, for example, $100 billion school choice, a voucher program. The Republican idea is we're going to devise a voucher program, for example, for the D.C. schools. So we're going to make it really modest, of $1,500 in the scholarship, and very small. And it only applies, this is what they actually did, $1,500. The school has to be physically dangerous as well as the students failing. And that way the Democrats can't oppose it. Wrong. What that does is it makes it invisible. Press is going to make a big deal out of $1,500. In fact, they'll just poo-poo the $1,500 because an education costs a lot more than that. But the Democrats, it's life and death. That's the teacher unions. 25% of the delegates at every Democratic convention are teacher union members. That's a slush fund for the Democratic Party. It's essential. So I tried to sell the Bush administration on a $100 billion voucher program. And I thought it was really important that the voucher be at least equivalent to a public school tuition of these schools that are failing to teach the kids. Bush administration, and I had raised a lot of money. I've never been involved in, Republican or any political party campaigns, but I raised a lot of money for Bush, so I had access, but they weren't buying it. I proposed this to the Trump campaign through Miller and then Bannon. Trump actually gave a speech. It was $130 billion. And because I had explained to Steve, it's got to be, the tuition has to be, the tuition they did is $12,000. I would have preferred it, like in Detroit, $18,000, because that's what they pay. But $12,000 is, can you imagine what it would have done to the Democratic Party? You told every parent in the inner city, I'm going to give you $12,000 per child to find a school that will teach them. Trump gave the speech in the Detroit suburb. Unfortunately, it was the day after he had debated Hillary in the Foreign Policy Forum. So he took the first 18 minutes of the speech to attack Hillary, and that was all they reported. So you may not even have heard of this. But I think he's going to do it. And yeah, I agree. Republicans and the Mitch McConnells. Mitch McConnell, by the way, a very smart guy. We've had Mitch McConnell at our weekends. Very, very smart guy. But he's a deal maker. And he thinks of himself as a realist. Just the way, I mean, if you've watched Boehner defend his indefensible positions, they're realists. There aren't going to be dramatic changes. And so we have to deal with the realities and some of this. So, but I think this is all open to change now. And it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be, like I say, I don't believe in revolutions anymore, although what Trump has already done is something like a revolution, but it's not in the sense that world transforming. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
Over the last 75 years. The first was the Gramscian March, and they succeeded. They took over all the institutions. But they have now shown themselves to be so insane that people are beginning to realize what's going on. But there's the second one, which is the pivot and Cloven strategy. And we have $20 trillion now. They have put a millstone around our necks. And if interest rates go up to 3 or 4%, that's a huge burden on the national budget.
I was worried about that, but it only went up 0.25%. Yeah. The debt looks terrible. But if the economy were to grow 4 or 5%, it wouldn't look so terrible. It's all relative. It's not an absolute figure. You have to pay the debt, but if your income goes up, you can pay it.
Republicans in Congress want, I've heard, the revenue neutral. If they go for revenue neutral, that means that things have got to pay for themselves immediately, rather than grow the economy and let it pay back later.
Well, I don't know. I just heard on, I don't know, I guess it was Fox today, the Trump plan is that they're going to unleash, sell coal to China, oil, shale oil, this oil, that oil, and use those revenues to do the big infrastructure thing. So you can't tell. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's dynamic. It's not static. And we just have to fight every battle as it comes. I spoke too long. Oh.
Might it be that the left has effectively hijacked the educational system? And I know that you're doing all kinds of good work in trying to re-educate colleges and students in the face of incredible difficulties. What, in your opinion, is a good way to gain back control over the educational system from the left?
Yeah. First, let me say, the left was able to do this because conservatives did nothing. Conservatives just left it to them. It's not like boards of trustees are all composed of leftists. They're not. 85% of the students in this country, college students, are in public universities. Republicans, what do we control? 33 state legislatures and governorships. All it takes is the chairman of the Appropriations Committee to pick up the phone to the president of the university and tell him what he wants. It shouldn't be done, doesn't have to be done by legislation. It can be done by phone calls. And because the chairman of an Appropriations Committee has an oxygen tube directly to that president. He could just put his thumb on it. Everything that president needs to build his career requires money. And that money comes out of that first thing is the Appropriations Committee. I've actually, I haven't recommended this before, but let me tell you, I was listening to O'Reilly tonight, and O'Reilly and Eric Bolling have no idea of, like, universities. They're all upset about some teacher told their kids that if they voted for Trump, they're terrorists, okay? What can we do? Can we fire her? No, she has free speech. No, she doesn't. No. University professors do not have free speech. If they did, then a geography or geology professor could say teach their kids the earth is flat. Can't do that. Or a chemistry professor could teach them the theory of phlogiston. Or, you could go on and on. Academic freedom is a freedom to be professional. You can teach your expertise. This was a psychology professor, by the way. Just talking about politics. Should fire her. But then you have to fight the political battle, and you have to have university. My partner, Peter Collier, once said that the employment profile of a university president is a cross between Saul Alinsky and Neville Chamberlain. And that's what it is. They're worthless. One of our people was put in jail at George Mason University for putting up a poster challenging a terrorist conference. We have to get lawyers and everything, but that's the mentality of these people. They have no respect for the that was First Amendment issue. We're not faculty. We get to express our opinion. But I think that these chairman of appropriations committees, or it could be the governor, whatever, should tell the president of the university, your faculty has been purged of conservatives. You have no conservatives. This is unhealthy. We want intellectual diversity. You've got these, actually, they have $100 million at the University of Michigan on diversity. And you would be shocked to know what diversity means there. We want you to just include intellectual and political diversity. Then we want to see every year, we want a report from you on the number of hires of conservatives that you have made. That will begin to make a difference. And we don't want to see professors shooting their mouths off in the classroom on political issues. And if we hear about it, we want that professor put on probation. It's not that hard if you are willing to wield the power. That's the problem with Republicans is they won't fight, and they're afraid. And the thing that Trump has done is shows you what you can accomplish if you're not afraid. Like I say, I don't know what kind of impression that's made on Paul Ryan, but I'm sure it's made some. I'm sure that the Republican Party is not what it was before Trump.
Wendy gets the last word. David, you mentioned on your education history, maybe incorrectly, or you can affirm it, that you're pleased with Betsy DeVos's nomination, and would you comment on that and any of the other people that Trump has nominated?
I've only met Betsy DeVos once. She was very friendly, and I spoke at an event in Michigan, which she probably had a lot to do with. She's open. I don't think charter schools are the answer. It's got to be school choice. One of the things that I've said to the Trump people is that, and you'll notice when they talk about vouchers, they say for private schools or religious schools. Now, the black churches are the political heart of the inner city, and every black church could have a school. And if they were getting $12,000 a student, well, you can do the math yourself. It's whatever it is, it's over $300,000 for a class of 30 students. You could pay the teacher $100,000 and have enough money for the classroom and whatever else you needed. I would make a huge change. I like his appointments. I like the generals. I should have mentioned General Flynn, who was also at our weekend. I like the people that he's put in place. I don't expect to be pleased with everything. You know, the world is a very complicated place. Everybody, I just love the Democrats. It's, what did Joy Behar say? We'll soon be putting the hammer and sickle in the American flag. Actually, when there was a hammer and sickle, which there isn't anymore in Russia, she would have been all for it. Again, with Russia, Russia is not the same as the Soviet Union. The problem with communism was not only was it the ambitions of the great Russian Empire, which were bad enough, but in every country in the world, they had a fifth column. That was a danger. I mean, they could have flipped Western Europe. That was what NATO was about. Now you have a traditional Russia. Russia's been ruled by thugs forever. He's a gangster, true, but he has more limited ambitions. He's not trying to transform the whole world. ISIS is trying to transform the whole world. The Muslim Brotherhood is trying to transform the whole world. Those are the really dangerous characters. So, you have to deal with it. The world is not going to be a pleasant place. I always go back. It's all, to me, I've written about this. It's all in the first book, first 18 chapters of Genesis. The problem with the world is us. And that's incurable. It's just incurable. You can't have a world redeemed because the people who are going to, unless a divinity actually steps in and changes everything, because the people who are the redeemers have the same problems that created the problems in the world. They're deceitful. Hillary is perfect. She's a perfect symbol of what's wrong with that. Totally corrupt human being. Liar, greedy, deceitful, so forth. And she thinks of herself as a social redeemer.